So let's go ahead and look at the last set of controls that we're going to talk about today. The first one is the pickers control, and there's a date picker which allows you to control picking of dates, and that's a pretty common functionality, so it's already built in here. And you can do some things like the locale or the interval, the minimum and maximum dates. You can also make it into a timer with a countdown. But what's really interesting is actually this picker view, because this is completely customizable. This is something that a lot of times you would use a drop down to do. It's a little bit more difficult in order to do this, so kind of to know what you're getting into. With this kind of control, you have to implement a protocol for this picker view, and then that protocol is going to define some methods that you have to implement that basically provide some functionality for populating the list initially, and it can also be columnized like this date one is, so you could have multiple different wheels in this picker control. But also you provide some functionality for what happens when the user clicks on it to give kind of a callback. So it's actually a very useful control, kind of a unique thing to iOS with these dials here. And a lot of times you can get a lot of user interface that would be multiple controls all into this one control, and it'll save you a lot of space and make it real easy for a user to use. The next thing is the navigation bar. And let me pull that one up here. So this navigation bar, this you've probably seen pretty common in a lot of iOS applications. It basically is used to let the user know where they're at in the app, kind of a breadcrumb trail. There's some API that we'll cover kind of in a later module in the next course about how to set the history and how to go back from a page and whatnot using this control. But this is a useful control, very similar to a breadcrumb control that you might use in ASP.NET or a web app. And then the search bar control, this is a very interesting control actually. There's a lot of functionality to this control, and it's quite a useful control. Really, if you're trying to create some kind of a search page, you definitely want to use this control. There's a lot of customization that you can do here. You can of course populate the text. You can use placeholder text just like you can with the normal text field. But you can do some things here that make the control really interesting and really useful for the functionality of searching. The prompt, of course, will put some text above your control, prompting the user for what this search is about. You can show a search results button here that the user can click, bookmarks button, a cancel button in the search, and a scope bar here if you have some way to filter your selection, and you can add your scope titles here. So really quite a large amount of functionality that's built in this control. Of course, you have the capitalization and the correction here inside the search. And of course, a lot of this functionality you do have to implement the back-end part, but it's really not that difficult. You basically, for most of these controls, you're going to be implementing some protocol that's like in C# we had talked about how it's kind of like an interface, and it tells you what methods you need to implement in order to use that control. So search bar, very useful control. And the last one we're going to talk about is the toolbar. And this is also another very useful control that I think a lot of people overlook because it's one of those controls that is not available in a lot of other UI building applications and platforms. But this is just a real nice looking, easy to use control that lets you can throw these bar button items on here, and you can add commands to your application real easily by doing this. So this is really good for if your application might have some common commands that you're gonna utilize, and you can customize this a little bit. There's not a lot of customization. You can change the style, and you can change the tint to the control. But again, it's a really useful control.